The autumn air carried the usual chaos of Hanover's central station, as Fredel Roa stepped onto the crowded platform. In September 1918, the 17-year-old had fled his home, after yet another heated argument with his parents. Convinced that the bustling German city would offer him the freedom and anonymity he desperately sought. Among the vendors hawking their wares, and groups of wayward teenagers loitering around the station entrance, Fredel believed he could blend in seamlessly and disappear into the urban landscape. However, from the moment he arrived, Fredel stood out to someone watching from the shadows. Fritz Harman had made the station his hunting ground, positioning himself as an unofficial authority figure who appeared to help lost youths while harboring sinister intentions. Fritz approached Fredel with practiced ease, presenting himself as someone familiar with the area, who could provide assistance. The hungry, exhausted teenager saw no reason to refuse the offer of food and shelter. From this seemingly helpful stranger, Fritz led Fredel through narrow streets to an apartment building at 27 Sellstrasse. The door closed behind them, and Fredel Roa was never seen again. Within hours of his disappearance, his family began searching desperately for their son. Their investigation eventually brought them to Hanover, where witnesses reported seeing Fredel leave with a man matching Fritz's description. By October, authorities reluctantly agreed to investigate. When police forced entry into Fritz's apartment, they discovered him in bed with a partially clothed 13-year-old boy. This discovery led to Fritz's immediate arrest for assault and battery, providing officers with justification to search the premises. Unfortunately, their investigation proved woefully inadequate. Had they searched more thoroughly, they would have found Fredel's severed head, wrapped in newspaper and hidden behind the stove. This missed opportunity marked the beginning of one of Germany. Fritz Harman's path to becoming a monster began long before that fateful day at the station. Born in 1879 as the youngest of 6 children, Fritz entered a household already fractured by dysfunction and financial strain. His father, Ollie, possessed a volatile temperament and had abandoned steady employment after Fritz's mother, Joanna, received a modest inheritance. While the money kept bills paid, it created new tensions within the family, as Ollie exploited his wife's resources. Rather than providing for his children, Joanna became overprotective of young Fritz, sheltering him from the outside world, while his older siblings struggled with their own demons. One brother eventually required institutionalization, following a violent incident, while Fritz's sisters turned to prostitution. This environment of instability and adult problems shaped Fritz's early development in troubling ways. He displayed unusual behaviors that unsettled those around him, inventing disturbing games involving restraints and enjoying frightening others. Beyond normal childhood mischief, school provided no refuge for the struggling boy. Teachers described him as polite but academically deficient, repeating grades and showing little interest in learning. Fritz also endured a trauma he rarely discussed as an adult. When a teacher sexually abused him, without avenues for reporting such violations, the perpetrator faced no consequences, leaving Fritz to process this violation alone. As adolescence arrived, Fritz developed physically into a strong teenager, though emotionally he remained dependent on his mother and distant from peers. After abandoning attempts to learn a trade, he volunteered for military training, seeking structure and direction. For several months, the discipline seemed beneficial, until mysterious episodes caused him to collapse without warning. Medical evaluations diagnosed conditions similar to epilepsy, resulting in his discharge in November 1895 as unfit for service. Returning home, Fritz's return to Hanover in 1899 marked the beginning of a downward spiral that would consume the next 2 decades. Nothing had improved at home, and Fritz's internal struggles intensified rather than resolved. In 19, he became engaged to a woman named Erna, and she soon became pregnant with his child. This conventional path might have provided stability, except the German military recalled him for compulsory service. Despite his previous discharge and documented mental instability, his second military stint mirrored the first. with dizzy spells landing him in hospitals until his discharge in 1902. Labeled unfit not just for service, but for any heavy labor moving in with Erna. Fritz accused her of infidelity, prompting her to end their engagement. From that point forward, Fritz embraced criminality with increasing frequency, cycling through petty thefts, lies, and violent confrontations. Various employers hired him for odd jobs, only to terminate him when he inevitably stole from them. Between 1905 and 1912, Fritz spent more time in prison than free, serving sentences of varying lengths that failed to modify his behavior outside prison walls. His brief periods of freedom consisted of the same thefts, scams, and assaults that had incarcerated him. Alcohol exacerbated his violent temper and fueled his criminal impulses. By 1913, his lengthy record led to a significant conviction when police discovered stolen property during a burglary investigation, earning him 5 years in prison. When Fritz walked free in 1918, Germany had emerged from World War I, economically devastated and socially chaotic. Work proved scarce and streets teemed with displaced people, particularly thousands of young men drifting into cities, seeking food or employment. Fritz joined these masses without money or family support, immediately reverting to familiar criminal patterns. However, the post-war environment made crime considerably easier, as understaffed police forces struggled to manage RAM. Fritz thrived in the chaotic post-war environment, confronting pickpockets and lecturing runaways about staying out of trouble, with enough authority that people assumed he held legitimate power. This carefully cultivated appearance made vulnerable young people more willing to trust and follow him. Between 1918 and 1924, Fritz developed a methodical routine at the station, targeting runaways or commuters passing through the city. His victims range from barely teenagers to young adults in their early 20s, all sharing one critical vulnerability: willingness to trust someone appearing to have authority. Fritz approached potential victims, asking questions, offering assistance, and presenting himself as someone steering them from danger. Once trust was established, he shifted conversations toward offering a place to rest or assistance he claimed he could provide. Inside his apartment at 27 Sellstrasse, the helpful dynamic changed rapidly. Fritz would provide food and a place to sit, lulling victims into false security before launching his attack. What followed earned Fritz the horrifying nickname, the Vampire of Hanover, when victims relaxed their guard sufficiently. Fritz would lunge forward and bite their throats with lethal force. He often targeted the Adam's apple, with multiple accounts describing him biting completely through victims' trachea. Many victims died not from blood loss, but from inability to breathe while choking on their own blood. This became Fritz's signature method of murder, combining savage brutality with a deeply disturbing intimacy. After killing victims, Fritz dismembered their bodies methodically. He typically disposed of remains in the Lane River, though not always completely. Another aspect of Fritz's notoriety involved his black market. Meat sales post-war, Germany's desperate conditions created steady demand for cheap food, and Fritz frequently sold ground or diced meat of unspecified origin. His prices undercut other butchers significantly, with so many transient youths arriving and departing Hanover each week. Disappearances often went unnoticed initially. Even when families reported missing persons, cases blended into extensive lists, with minimal investigative follow-through. The combination of Fritz's station access, the city's post-war chaos, and his relationship with police as an informant allowed him to continue operating for 6 devastating years. During this period, dozens of young men crossed his path, entered his apartment, and never emerged alive. The beginning of the end arrived in spring 1924, when children playing near the Lane River's banks spotted something unusual lodged near the water's edge. Their discovery triggered a chain of events that would finally expose the full scope of Fritz's crimes. As authorities began recovering human remains from the river, the pieces of a horrifying puzzle started assembling. The sheer number of victims shocked even hardened investigators, accustomed to the violence and desperation of post-war Germany. The investigation that followed revealed the catastrophic failures that had allowed Fritz to operate undetected. For so long, his position as a police informant had provided protective cover that prevented closer scrutiny of his activities. The inadequate search of his apartment following Fredel Roa's disappearance represented a missed opportunity that might have prevented numerous subsequent murders. The overwhelmed and understaffed police force, struggling with countless petty crimes and black market activities, have failed to recognize patterns that should have raised immediate red flags. As evidence mounted, the true extent of Fritz's crimes became undeniable. The Vampire of Hanover had preyed upon society's most vulnerable members, exploiting the chaos and desperation of post-war Germany to satisfy his deranged compulsions. His victims were young people seeking nothing more than survival, who trusted someone they believed represented safety and authority.